Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. I've been sitting here for 2 hours now, typing this out on my phone, uploading it, making sure someone knows what happened. The door is still open. The frost has spread across all the windows now, making patterns that look like faces, screaming faces. I tried to close the door 3 times. Each time I get close, something stops me. Not physically. It's like my body just won't. Like there's a command in my brain that I can't override. I can hear them now. Outside. Multiple footsteps, circling the cabin, whispering in a language I don't recognize but somehow understand. The boundary thins. The sleepers stir. The exchange must happen. The watch must continue, over and over, like a chant, like a prayer. I looked outside once, just once, through the frost-covered window. They're all there. Every watcher from the past century. I can see through them, translucent figures in white shirts and dark pants. Men and women, young and old, all with the same hollow eyes, the same patient expression, waiting. James is the clearest, standing by the oak tree, looking up at that branch. I recognize some of the others from the newspaper articles. Patricia Williams, she was a teacher. Michael Foster, owned a gas station. Jennifer Morse. She was only 23. All of them watching my cabin, all of them waiting for me to join them. It's 2:45 a.m. 45 minutes left to decide. I've been thinking about what James said, about the old things, the sleepers. Part of me thinks it's insane. Ancient beings sleeping under the Vermont hills, watchers keeping them from waking? It sounds like something from a bad horror movie. But then I remember things, stories my grandfather used to tell, about why he built this cabin where he did, about the safe zones and the thin places, about respecting the old boundaries. Some ground is older than memory, he used to say. Some ground remembers when the world was different. You don't build there, you don't dig there, you don't disturb what's sleeping there. I thought he was just being superstitious, old Vermont folklore. But what if he knew? What if he built this cabin here specifically because it was safe, close to the boundary but not over it? Until I crossed it, until I found that campsite, until I disturbed something that should have stayed hidden. I tried to pray, first time in 20 years, but the words wouldn't come, like something was stopping them, like the air itself rejected them. Instead, other words came, ancient words. Words I'd never heard before, but somehow knew. Penglui mgluanaf, sleeping in the dark, waiting in the deep, dreaming of the time before. Number. Those aren't my thoughts. Those aren't my words. They're getting in my head. The watchers, the old things, I can feel them, under the ground, miles below, vast, impossible. Older than the mountains, older than life itself, dreaming. And in their dreams, God, in their dreams, they remember when they ruled, when the earth was young and wet and dark, when different stars burned in the sky. When humanity's ancestors were nothing but primitive cells in primordial soup. They want to wake up, they want to reclaim what was theirs, and only the watchers keep them sleeping. Only the rituals. Only the sacrifices, every 6 years. A life for continued sleep, a soul to strengthen the boundary. It's not murder, it's not suicide, it's necessity. I understand now. I understand why the trail cam showed me the future. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise, a contract, written in time itself. When I crossed that boundary, when I found that campsite, I signed that contract without knowing it. The old things touched my mind, marked me, made me part of the pattern. The camera just showed what was already decided, what had to happen to keep the world safe. But understanding doesn't make it easier, doesn't make me want to die. I thought about calling someone, my sister, my parents, just to hear their voices one more time. But what would I say? Hey, just wanted to say I love you before I become an interdimensional guardian? Number. Better they remember our last normal conversation. Better they think I just snapped, had a breakdown, killed myself in the woods. Better that than knowing the truth. That reality is thin, that monsters sleep beneath our feet, that their brother, their son, gave his life to keep those monsters sleeping. 3 a.m. 30 minutes. James is at the door now. Still invisible, but I can feel him. Waiting. It's easier if you accept it, Tom, he says. Fighting just makes the transition harder, makes the binding incomplete. You'll be stuck between worlds, neither human nor watcher. Trust me, I fought. I fought hard, and I spent 6 years regretting it. What's it like? I asked. Being a watcher, lonely. You see everything, but can't interact with anything. You walk through the world like a ghost. You watch people live their lives, never knowing how close they are to oblivion. You maintain the rituals. You sing the songs that keep them sleeping. You guard the boundaries. And you can never leave? Not until the next exchange. Not until someone else takes your place. Then you're free. Really free. Not dead, not alive, just free. What if I refuse? What if I just don't go? Then they wake up. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The boundary weakens without a watcher. The dreams leak through. People start having nightmares. Animals act strange. The ground shifts. And eventually, they break through. You're lying. Trying to manipulate me. I wish I was, Tom. God, I wish I was, but you felt them, didn't you? When you spoke the words, you felt how vast they are, how hungry. I did. I felt them. And I knew he was telling the truth. 3:15 a.m. 15 minutes. The other watchers are moving now, forming a path from my door to the oak tree, an honor guard, or a prison escort. The footprints are back, standing by the door. It's time, Tom. I stood up, my legs shaking, the shotgun heavy in my hands. I'm not going. Silence. Then laughter, not just from James, from all of them. A chorus of hollow, sad laughter. That's what I said. That's what we all said. But here we are. The frost on the windows cracked, shattered. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the smell of earth and age and something else. Something like the ocean, but older. Primordial. The shotgun in my hands started to change. The metal corroding, rusting. Aging decades in seconds. The wood rotting, crumbling. Within moments I was holding dust. Your weapons are nothing here, Tom. Your locks, your barricades, nothing. This is older than your technology, older than your civilization, older than your species. The refrigerator I'd pushed against the back window moved, slid aside like it weighed nothing. The window opened, more watchers entered. I could see them clearly now, not just from the past century, from further back. Colonists in buckled shoes, Native Americans in traditional dress, and others, things that might have been human once but were older. Bent, changed, all watchers, all guardians, all here for the exchange. Last chance, Tom, James said. Easy or hard? I looked at them, at all of them. Centuries of sacrifice, centuries of guardians. And I realized something. They were all afraid. Every single one of them. Even after death, even after becoming watchers, they were afraid. Afraid of what they guarded against, afraid of what would happen if they failed. And if they were afraid, if these beings who had seen the truth were afraid, then maybe their fear was justified. Maybe the sacrifice was necessary. Maybe I had no choice. I thought about Emma, my sister's baby, growing up in a world where the old things stayed sleeping, having a normal life, never knowing her uncle died to keep her safe. Was one life worth that? Was my life worth that? 3:25 a.m. 5 minutes. "All right," I said. "All right, I'll come." Relief washed over James's invisible features. I could feel it. "You're making the right choice, Tom. The only choice. But I have conditions. You're not in a position to negotiate. Maybe not. But you want this to go smoothly, right? You want the transition to be clean? Then listen." Silence. Then, "What conditions?" "First, my family never knows. They never find out about any of this. They think it was just depression or something. Normal human tragedy. That's already assured. The world must never know. Second, I want to know it works. I want to see that the boundary holds, that the old things stay sleeping. You'll see. As a watcher, you'll see everything. Third," I paused. This was the important one. "When my time is up, when I find my replacement, I want to make sure they're actually guilty of something. Not just some innocent hiker who took a wrong turn. Someone who deserves this." James was quiet for a long moment. "That's unusual, but acceptable. As long as someone takes your place, the method doesn't matter." I nodded. "Then I'll come." 3:29 a.m. 1 minute. I stood up, put on my jacket. The white shirt and dark pants materialized on my body, replacing my clothes. I didn't question it, beyond questioning now. The watchers formed two lines, a pathway to the door, to my fate. I walked between them, each one nodding as I passed, a salute, a welcome, a farewell. James walked beside me. Still invisible, but more solid now. More real. "It won't hurt," he promised. "I'll make sure of that." We walked to the oak tree. The rope was already there. Had always been there, maybe. Waiting. 3:30 a.m. "Last words?" James asked. I looked up at the sky. The stars were different. Wrong. Too many, too bright, moving in patterns that hurt to follow. The boundary was already thinning, just from the gap between watchers, just from these few minutes without a guardian. "Yeah," I said. "Tell whoever finds me, tell them I'm sorry. And tell them to stay away from the deep woods." Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. The rope went around my neck. But as I stood there, as the other watchers began their chant, as I prepared for the end, I saw something, the trail cam, its red light blinking, recording everything, including the watchers, because in the cold air, in the frost and mist, they had form, they had shape. The camera would see them, people would know. They would know I didn't do this to myself. That's why I'm finishing this now, with my last seconds, typing with numb fingers as the world goes dark. Uploading it. Look for the pictures. Tomorrow. No, today, October 15th. Check the news, Vermont. Stowe. Dead hunter found hanging. But know this, I didn't kill myself. And if you ever find strange symbols in the woods, if you ever find a campsite that feels wrong, walk away. Don't report it. Don't investigate, just walk away. Because they're watching, they're always watching. And the camera never lies. I found a trail. Cam showing my suicide, I installed it yesterday. The photo is still on my kitchen counter. Right there, next to my cold coffee and yesterday's mail. My own face stares back at me from the trail cam's grainy display, hanging from the oak tree behind my cabin. The timestamp reads October 15th, 2024. 3:47 a.m. It's October 14th today. 11:23 p.m. I've got 4 hours and 24 minutes until whatever this is happens. Or doesn't happen. Because it can't happen, right? Trail cams don't predict the future. They just take pictures of deer and raccoons and the occasional trespasser. But before you think I'm crazy, before you close this video and move on to something else, let me ask you this. What would you do? If you saw yourself die tomorrow, would you run? Would you fight? Or would you do what I'm doing right now? Sitting here in my cabin in the Vermont woods, watching the clock tick closer to my own death, trying to understand how any of this is possible. Comment below what you'd do. Really, I need to know I'm not alone in this. All right, the story's starting now. Let me tell you exactly how I got here. Yesterday morning. God, was it really just yesterday? I'd driven out to my hunting cabin near Stowe, Vermont to set up some new trail cams. Deer season was coming up and I wanted to scout the area. Normal stuff. The kind of thing I'd done 100 times before. The cabin isn't much. Just a 2-room wooden structure my grandfather built back in the 60s. No cell service, no internet, just me, the woods, and whatever wildlife decides to wander through. That's how I like it. That's how I've always liked it. I'd ordered 3 trail cams from Amazon, the fancy kind with night vision and motion sensors. $200 each, but worth it if they helped me bag a 10-pointer this season. The first 2 went up easy. One by the salt lick near the creek, another on the main trail leading up from the valley. The third one, that's where things get weird. See, there's this oak tree about 50 yards behind my cabin. Massive thing. Must be 200 years old, easy. The trunk is so thick I can't wrap my arms around it, and the lowest branch, well, it's about 12 feet off the ground. Perfect height for... number? I'm getting ahead of myself. I strapped the trail cam to a pine tree facing the oak. Good angle. Good coverage. If any deer came through that clearing, I'd know about it. I tested it, walked in front of it a few times, checked the pictures on my phone through the app. Everything worked perfect. Crystal clear images, even with the morning shadows. I spent the rest of the day doing maintenance on the cabin, fixing a loose board on the porch, cleaning the gutters, normal stuff. Had a couple beers, watched the sunset, went to bed early because, honestly, there's not much else to do out here once it gets dark. This morning, I woke up to check the cameras. The first 2 showed exactly what you'd expect. A few deer at dawn, a fox around midnight, the neighbor's dog that always gets loose and wanders through my property. Normal, boring even. But the third camera, I almost dropped my phone when I saw it. The first few images were fine. Time-stamped from yesterday afternoon and evening. A squirrel at 4:15 p.m. Nothing at all until 11:30 p.m. when a raccoon wandered through. Then, nothing again until 3:47 a.m. That's when the camera captured me. But not me walking through the frame like when I tested it. Me hanging from that thick lower branch of the oak tree. A rope around my neck. My body completely still. My face. God, my face was purple. Eyes bulging. Tongue out. I've seen death before. Hunting. War. Car accidents. This was death. This was real. But the timestamp, October 15th, 2024. 3:47 a.m. Tomorrow. I refreshed the app 3 times, 4 times. The image didn't change. I even deleted it and re-downloaded it thinking maybe it was some kind of glitch. But when I logged back in, there it was, waiting for me. I ran outside, actually ran, to check the camera itself. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe they'd switched out my camera with a fake one, preloaded with images. But no, it was my camera. Serial number matched. The lock I'd put on it was still there, untouched. I pulled the SD card and stuck it in my laptop. Same image. Same timestamp. That's when I noticed something else. In the background of the photo, barely visible in the night vision's green glow, there was another figure, standing at the edge of the frame, watching. I zoomed in as much as I could, but the image got too pixelated. All I could make out was a shape, human-sized, just standing there. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely type as I went through the rest of the images. The camera had taken 3 more photos after the hanging, 3:48 a.m., 3:49 a.m., 3:50 a.m. In each one, my body hung in the same position. But the figure had moved closer. In the last image, at 3:50 a.m., it was standing right next to my hanging body, one hand raised, almost like it was touching me, or pushing me, or... I threw up right there on my laptop keyboard. I've been going over everything for the past 18 hours. Every detail, every possibility. First thought, someone's edited these images. Deep, fake technology or whatever. But I'm not important enough for that kind of elaborate prank. I'm a nobody. I work at a hardware store in Burlington. I've got maybe 12 friends on Facebook. Who would spend that kind of time and effort to mess with me? Second thought. Carbon monoxide poisoning. I've heard about people hallucinating entire events because of gas leaks. So I opened all the windows, went outside for an hour, came back. The images were still there, still dated tomorrow, still showing me dead. Third thought, and this is where I started to really lose it. What if I'm already dead? What if this already happened, and I'm just, I don't know, reliving my last day, like that movie where the guy keeps waking up on the same day? But no, I called my boss, told him I was sick, wouldn't be in tomorrow. He complained about short notice, said Jenkins would have to cover my shift. That's not something a ghost would worry about, right? I drove into town around noon, needed to get away from the cabin, clear my head. Stopped at the diner on Main Street, had coffee and eggs. Marcy, the waitress, asked if I was feeling all right. Said I looked pale. Just tired, I told her. You should get some rest, hun. You look like death. I almost laughed, almost told her everything. But what would I say? That I've seen my own death? That tomorrow morning at 3:47 a.m. I'm going to hang myself from a tree? She'd call the cops. They'd put me on a psychiatric hold. And then what if that's what leads to it? What if trying to prevent it is what causes it? I sat in that diner for 3 hours, drinking coffee and thinking, going over every detail of my life. I'm not suicidal. I've never been suicidal. Sure, life's not perfect. Whose is? But I've got no reason to do that. My parents are still alive, still healthy. My sister just had a baby. I've got football season to look forward to. I just bought tickets to see the Patriots play the Bills next month. You don't buy football tickets if you're planning to number. This isn't me. This can't be me. Which means someone else is involved. That figure in the background. I drove back to the cabin around 4 p.m. Spent the next few hours setting up defenses. Locked all the windows. Barricaded the door with the couch. Loaded my grandfather's old shotgun. The one he used to hunt with back when Kennedy was president. Then I did something stupid. I went back to look at that oak tree. There were no rope marks on the branch, no disturbance in the leaves below, nothing to indicate anyone had been there. But as I stood there looking up at that branch, 12 feet off the ground, I realized something. There's no way I could get up there on my own. I'm 53 years old and 30 pounds overweight. I haven't climbed a tree since I was 12. Someone would have to help me. I ran back to the cabin and checked the images again. Looked closer at my body position. The angle of the rope. The way my arms hung at my sides. This wasn't a suicide. This was a murder. It's 11:47 p.m. now, 4 hours to go. I'm sitting in my cabin with all the lights on, shotgun across my lap, watching the only door. I've pushed the refrigerator against the back window, the only other way in. My phone is recording everything, uploading directly to the cloud. If something happens, if someone comes, there'll be evidence. I thought about running, getting in my truck and driving as far away as possible. But what if that's what causes it? What if I crash on the way out? What if the crash doesn't kill me but leaves me injured and someone finds me or what if the images change? What if running means it happens somewhere else, some other way, and I don't even see it coming? At least here, I know. At least here, I'm ready. I've been thinking about that figure in the photos, going over everyone I know, everyone who might want to hurt me. But I can't think of anyone. I'm not rich, I don't have enemies. I keep to myself, mind my own business, unless... There was something. About a month ago. I was out here doing some early scouting, and I found something weird in the woods. A campsite, but not a normal one. There were these symbols carved into the trees. Circles and triangles and things I didn't recognize. Animal bones arranged in patterns. The whole place felt wrong. I reported it to the Park Service. They said they'd check it out. I never heard back, figured they'd handled it. But what if whoever made that campsite knew I'd reported them? What if they've been watching me? What if something just moved outside? I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. It's 12:03 a.m., still 3 hours and 44 minutes until... The footsteps stopped, right outside the door. Knock, 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 slow, deliberate. Who knocks on a cabin door in the middle of the woods at midnight? I'm not answering, I'm not moving, I'm just sitting here with my shotgun, waiting. Knock, 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 louder this time. Then a voice, soft, almost familiar. I know you're in there, Tom. I know you've seen the pictures. How do they know my name? How do they know about the pictures? You can't change what's coming, Tom. You can't fight fate. I want to yell back, want to tell them I've got a gun. But something stops me. Some instinct that says staying quiet is better. Let them think I'm asleep. Let them think. The doorknob is turning. It's locked. I locked it. I know I locked it. But it's turning anyway. The door is opening. There's no one there. The door is wide open, cold October air flooding in, and there's no one there. But there are footprints. Wet footprints on my floor, leading from the door toward me. I can see them forming. One step at a time, getting closer. Something invisible is walking toward me. I raised the shotgun. Stop! I'll shoot. The footsteps stopped, 10 feet away. Then that voice again. But not from the doorway, from right in front of me. From the empty air where the footprints ended. You can't shoot what you can't see, Tom, and you can't fight what you don't understand. The temperature dropped. My breath came out in clouds. Frost formed on the windows. Who are you? My voice cracked. What do you want? I'm just a messenger, Tom. Here to make sure things happen the way they're supposed to happen. The pictures, they're fake. They have to be fake. A laugh, soft and sad. Oh, Tom, the camera doesn't lie. It just shows what will be, what has to be. Why? Why me? Because you saw something you weren't supposed to see. You reported something that should have stayed hidden. And now balance has to be restored. The campsite, those symbols. I knew I should have just walked away. I'll leave, I said. I'll sell the cabin. I'll never come back. Too late for that, Tom. The image has been captured. The future has been written. The footprints started moving again, circling me. But I'll give you a choice. Come willingly, and it'll be quick, painless. Fight, and, well, the camera showed you what happens if you fight. I thought about the image. My purple face, bulging eyes. That's what happens if I fight? What happens if I come willingly? You just stop, like falling asleep. No pain, no fear, just ending. I looked at the clock. 12:31 a.m., 3 hours and 16 minutes. I need time to think, to... You have until 3:30, Tom. That's when we leave for the tree, whether you come willingly or not. The footprints moved back toward the door, stopped at the threshold. Oh, and Tom? That shotgun? It won't help, but keep it if it makes you feel better. The door slammed shut. I've been sitting here for 2 hours now, typing this out on my phone. Uploading it, making sure someone knows what happened. It's 2:45 a.m. 45 minutes left to decide. Do I go willingly into whatever this is, or do I fight and end up at that tree anyway? I keep looking at the picture, at that figure standing next to my hanging body. Is that what's been in my cabin? Is that what's waiting for me? I tried to pray, first time in 20 years, but the words wouldn't come, like something was stopping them. I thought about calling someone, my sister, my parents, just to hear their voices one more time, but what would I say? Hey, just wanted to say I love you before I maybe die. Number. Better they remember our last normal conversation. Better they don't know I saw it coming. 3:15 a.m. 15 minutes. The footprints are back. Just appeared. Standing by the door. It's time, Tom. I stood up, my legs shaking, the shotgun heavy in my hands. I'm not going. Silence. Then the footprints rushed toward me. Fast, too fast. Something cold wrapped around my throat. Lifted me off the ground. The shotgun fell from my hands. Wrong choice, Tom. Everything went black. I woke up at the base of the oak tree. My hands were tied. The rope was already around my neck, the other end thrown over that high branch. The figure was there, still invisible, but I could see its outline in the frost that formed in the air around it. Last chance, Tom. Easy or hard? I spat at where I thought its face would be. Hard it is. The rope went tight, pulled me up. My feet left the ground. But as I hung there, choking, dying, I saw something. The trail cam. Its red light blinking, recording everything, including the figure. Because in the cold air, in the frost and mist, it had shape, it had form. The camera would see it. People would know. They would know I didn't do this to myself. That's why I'm finishing this now, with my last seconds. Typing with numb fingers as the world goes dark. Uploading it, look for the pictures. Tomorrow. No, today. October 15th. Check the news. Vermont, stow-dead hunter found hanging. But know this, I didn't kill myself. And if you ever find strange symbols in the woods, if you ever find a campsite that feels wrong, walk away. Don't report it. Don't investigate, just walk away. Because they're watching, they're always watching. And the camera never lies. Upload complete. Message sent. Wait, something's wrong. I'm still typing. I'm still conscious, but I saw myself die. I felt the rope. I felt everything go black. How am I still... The phone in my hand. It's not my phone. It's older. Different. And my hands... These aren't my hands. They're younger. Smoother. I'm standing next to the tree now, looking at the body hanging there. My body. But I'm not in it anymore. I'm in something else. Someone else. The figure. I'm the figure from the photograph. Number. No, this can't be. There's another voice in my head now, not mine, older, tired. Welcome to the exchange, Tom. You took my place, just like I took the place of the one before me. And someday, someone will take yours. This is what happens when you find us. When you report us, you don't die, you become us. You become the thing that ensures the balance. The campsite you found? That was mine. My last refuge before my time ran out. Before I had to find a replacement. And now it's yours. For a while, until someone else stumbles upon it, reports it, starts the cycle again. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. This body, it doesn't work like mine did. It's cold, empty. Not quite alive, not quite dead. I watch as the sun rises, as my old body hangs there, growing stiff in the morning light. Soon, someone will find it. The police will come. They'll rule it a suicide. No one will believe the trail cam photos were dated wrong. A glitch, they'll say. Trauma, they'll say. And I'll be here, invisible, waiting. Because that's what we do. We wait. We watch. We maintain the balance. And someday I'll find someone else who sees too much. Someone else who reports what should stay hidden. And then I'll be free. If you're watching this, if you've made it this far, please, share this story. Let others know. Don't let what happened to me happen to them. And whatever you do, don't come looking for me. Don't try to find that oak tree, because I'll be waiting. And the camera, remember, the camera never lies. End of story. But before you go, check your trail cams. Check the dates on your photos. You never know what tomorrow might show you. And if you see yourself in a photo that hasn't happened yet, well, you know where to find me. I'll be waiting by the oak tree. Always waiting. Comment below if you've ever caught something unexplainable on camera. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more true stories from the woods. And remember, some things are better left unreported. Sweet dreams. Story number 2. The receipt was on my nightstand when I woke up. Crisp white paper. Date stamped 3:47 a.m., signed in that familiar spidery handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The amount, $800, matched my rent perfectly. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. I live alone. My doors were locked. And according to my bank app, the money was already gone. If you're listening to this right now, comfortable in your bed, maybe about to drift off to sleep, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's a warning. Because once you know about him, once you really know, he might start visiting you too. But before we dive into this nightmare, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want to hear what happens next. And if you've ever had a strange dream about paying for something, drop a comment below. You might already be marked. The story begins now. 3 months ago, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. A 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle for $1,200 a month. That's unheard of. The building was old, 1920s brick construction, but beautifully maintained. Hardwood floors that creaked just enough to feel homey. Crown molding. Original fixtures. The kind of place that usually goes for 3 times what I was paying. But there were signs I should have noticed. Little things that my desperate mind explained away. The building's directory was written in fading gold letters, but some names seemed to shimmer and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. The elevator made sounds. Not mechanical sounds, but something organic, like breathing. And the hallways always smelled faintly of something I couldn't identify. Something that reminded me of old coins and wet earth. The other tenants were wrong somehow, not obviously. You'd pass them in the hallway and they'd nod politely, but their smiles never reached their eyes. And they all had this look about them. Tired, hollow. Like people who'd been carrying a weight for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. I remember Mrs. Chen from 3A warning me on my second day. She grabbed my arm as I was checking my mailbox, her fingers cold as winter bones. "The building takes from you," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Little pieces at first. You won't notice. But it takes and takes until there's nothing left but the shell." I laughed it off. Figured she was just one of those eccentric old ladies you find in every apartment building. But her eyes, God, her eyes looked ancient, like she'd seen things that no one should have to see. Mr. Hendricks, my landlord, seemed like a sweet old man when I first met him. Probably 70-something, wire-rimmed glasses, always wore these vintage three-piece suits that smelled faintly of mothballs and something else, something I couldn't quite place, like copper pennies left in the rain. His office was in the basement of the building, behind a door marked Management in those old brass letters. The hallway leading to it was longer than it should have been, given the building's dimensions. And the walls were covered in framed photographs of previous tenants, hundreds of them dating back decades, all smiling, all happy, but if you looked closely, really closely, their eyes were empty. "Now, Sarah," he'd said during the lease signing, his voice soft as tissue paper, "there's just one unusual term in our agreement. Nothing to worry about, but I need to make you aware." I remember laughing. "What? No loud music after 10? He didn't smile. His pale blue eyes just watched me, waiting. The silence stretched until I felt compelled to fill it, to say something, anything, to break the tension that seemed to thicken the air like fog. The rent collection method is unconventional, but I assure you, it's perfectly legal. And convenient for you. No checks to write, no online transfers to set up. Everything happens automatically." The pen he handed me was old. Fountain pen with a gold nib that scratched against the paper like fingernails on a chalkboard. The ink was thick, almost black, but when the light hit it wrong, it seemed to move, shift, like it was alive. I should have asked more questions. God, why didn't I ask more questions? But the apartment was perfect, the price was incredible, and I was desperate to get out of my ex-boyfriend's place after he'd started bringing home other women and expecting me to be okay with it. So I signed, and as soon as the ink dried, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The first month was heaven. I decorated the place exactly how I'd always dreamed. Hung fairy lights in the bedroom, set up my home office in the spare room, started that YouTube channel I'd been planning for years. Life was finally coming together. But even during those first perfect weeks, there were irregularities. I'd wake up some mornings feeling exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all, even though I'd gone to bed early and slept through the night. My dreams were vivid but slippery. I could never quite remember them, just the impression of being somewhere else, somewhere cold and filled with the sound of papers rustling. Then came the first of the month. I went to bed on August 31st feeling great, had a glass of wine, watched some Netflix. Normal night. But the dream I had, I was in a vast office building, fluorescent lights humming overhead. The walls were this sickly beige color, like old newspapers, and there were cubicles stretching as far as I could see. Empty. All empty except for the sound of typing. Endless typing coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The air tasted of stale coffee and broken promises. Each cubicle was identical. Gray fabric walls, metal desks, ancient CRT monitors that flickered with green text I couldn't quite read, but in every chair sat a shadow. Not a person. Just the impression of where someone had been, the weight of their despair pressed into the fabric. Mr. Hendricks was there, sitting behind a desk that seemed too large for the space, too large for reality somehow. His face looked younger in the dream, smoother, but his eyes were ancient. They held the weight of every signature ever coerced, every lease ever signed in desperation. "Rent's due, Sarah." That's all he said. But somehow I knew exactly what to do. I reached into my pocket, a pocket I didn't have in my pajamas, and pulled out $800 in cash. Crisp bills that felt too real for a dream. Too heavy. They smelled like fear and tasted like copper when the dream wind carried their scent to my lips. He counted them slowly, each bill making this wet sound as he licked his thumb to separate them. When he finished, he smiled. His teeth were perfect. Too perfect. Like dentures made of pearls that had never known the ocean. "Receipt?" I nodded. Couldn't speak. Couldn't move except to nod. The word stuck in my throat like a stone. He pulled out an old-fashioned receipt book, the kind with carbon paper. Started writing with this fountain pen that leaked black ink onto his fingers. The scratching sound it made. God, I can still hear it sometimes when I'm falling asleep. Like insects burrowing through wood, like time itself being carved away. When I woke up, the receipt was there, on my nightstand, and the money was gone from my account. I called my bank immediately, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. "Yes, Ms. Coleman, I see the withdrawal, $800 at 3:47 a.m. Authorized payment to Hendricks Property Management. Is there a problem?" I didn't authorize that. I was asleep." The customer service rep paused. I could hear her typing. "It shows here you've set up automatic payments. Would you like to cancel the authorization?" "I never set up—" Yes, cancel it. More typing. Then, "I'm sorry, Miss Coleman. This payment method can't be modified from our end. You'll need to contact the payee directly." I hung up, stared at the receipt. The paper was old-fashioned, the kind you don't see anymore, and it smelled like that same copper penny scent that followed Mr. Hendricks around. But there was something else now, something underneath. The smell of old graves and forgotten promises. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd sleepwalked. Maybe I'd set up autopay and forgotten. The mind can play tricks, right? But deep down, in that part of your brain that still remembers being afraid of the dark, I knew something was wrong. I started recording myself sleeping, set up my phone on the dresser. The first few nights, nothing. Just me tossing and turning. Normal sleep. But I kept having the dreams. Not every night, but often enough. Dreams where I'd meet Mr. Hendricks in different locations. A subway platform with no trains. An empty movie theater where the screen showed nothing but static. A shopping mall after closing time where all the mannequins had his face. Always the same routine. He'd ask for rent, I'd pay. He'd give me a receipt. And every time I had the dream, I'd wake up $800 poorer. I tried staying awake on September 1st, loaded up on coffee, energy drinks, even slapped myself every time my eyes got heavy. But at 3 a.m., my body just shut down, like someone had flipped a switch. The dream that night was different. We were in my apartment, but not my apartment. The walls breathed. The furniture was the same but wrong, like someone had tried to recreate my space from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. Mr. Hendricks sat in my reading chair. He looked disappointed. "You're trying to avoid me, Sarah. This isn't real." "You're not real," he laughed. It sounded like autumn leaves being crushed underfoot. Real is such a limited concept. Is your debt real? Is your apartment real? Are the walls that keep you warm? The roof that keeps you dry? Are those real? You can't do this. It's illegal. You signed the lease. He pulled out a copy from nowhere, from the space between spaces. Section 47, subsection C. Tenant agrees to alternative payment collection methods as determined by landlord. Your signature's right there. I looked. It was my signature. But underneath it, in tiny print I swear wasn't there before, were words that made my skin crawl. Payment to be collected in the space between waking and sleeping, where contracts are binding and consent is implied. When I woke up, I wasn't in my bed. I was standing in my living room, facing the wall, and written on the wall in what looked like charcoal were the words, "Don't miss next month's payment." The writing disappeared when I turned on the lights. But I know what I saw. I decided to confront him. Went to the building office the next day. The door was one of those old frosted glass types, the kind you see in noir movies. Hendricks Property Management painted in gold letters that were starting to flake. The office inside was wrong, too deep. Like the building extended further back than it should. The secretary at the front desk was this young woman. Couldn't have been more than 20. But her eyes were old, tired, like she'd been sitting at that desk for decades. "I need to speak with Mr. Hendricks." She looked at me, through me. "Mr. Hendricks only meets with tenants during collection periods." "When's that?" She smiled. Her lipstick was the color of dried blood. "You know when." I left, but not before noticing something that made my stomach turn. The calendar on her desk. Every single day was marked as the first of the month. I started researching the building. The Seattle Public Library has archives going back to the 1800s. What I found. The building was constructed in 1923 by a man named Josiah Hendricks. He was a banker who'd made his fortune in ways that weren't exactly legal. Predatory loans, foreclosures on families during the Depression. The kind of man who'd take everything from you and sleep soundly. He died in 1941, in the building, in apartment 4B, my apartment. But here's where it gets worse. I found newspaper clippings, stories about tenants over the years, people who'd lived in the building and complained about strange dreams, about missing money, about seeing an old man who couldn't possibly be there because he'd been dead for decades. Most of them moved out. Eventually, but some just disappeared. Their apartments found empty. Rent paid up through the month. No forwarding address. I found a forum online, hidden in the deep web. Other people who'd rented from Mr. Hendricks over the years. Different cities, different buildings. But always the same story, the dreams, the receipts, the money disappearing. One user, username Sleepless in Chicago, had posted something that chilled me to the bone. He's not collecting rent. He's collecting something else. The money is just a symbol, a tradition. What he really takes happens in the dreams. Look at yourself in the mirror after you pay. Really look. You'll see what's missing. October came faster than I expected. I'd been preparing. Sleeping pills, alcohol, anything to knock me out so deep I wouldn't dream. I even tried checking into a hotel on the night of the 30th. Didn't matter. At exactly 3 a.m., I was back in that office, the one with the endless cubicles. But this time, I wasn't alone. There were others. Other tenants. I recognized the girl from 2B, the old veteran from 3C, even the young couple from the first floor. All of us standing in line, waiting. Nobody spoke. Nobody could speak. We just shuffled forward, step by step, toward Mr. Hendricks' desk at the end of the impossible room. When it was my turn, I tried to resist, tried to keep my hand from reaching into that impossible pocket, but my body moved without me, like I was a passenger in my own flesh. "Having trouble, Sarah?" His voice was different in this dream, layered, like multiple people speaking in unison across different decades. "This isn't legal. This isn't possible. Legal is what we agree to. Possible is what we accept. You accepted this when you signed, when you moved in, when you hung your pictures on the walls and called it home. The money appeared in my hand, but this time, I could see what it really was. Not cash. Something else. something that glowed with a color that doesn't exist in the waking world, something that hurt to look at directly. "What are you taking from me?" He smiled, that perfect, terrible smile. "Just a little time, Sarah. Just a few moments of your life. Seconds here, minutes there. You won't even notice they're gone." Most people don't. They just wake up one day wondering where their youth went, why they feel so tired, why their dreams seem so far away. I wanted to run, but you can't run in dreams. Not from him, so I paid, and woke up with another receipt. But I also woke up with something else, a plan. I started talking to the other tenants. Really talking, not just hallway pleasantries. The girl from 2B, Miranda, had been living there for 2 years. She looked 25, but admitted she was only 21. The dreams had aged her, stolen something from her that makeup couldn't hide. The veteran, Bill, had fought in Afghanistan, seen things that would break most people. But it was Mr. Hendricks who gave him nightmares. "I've faced real monsters," he told me over coffee in my apartment. "Men who'd kill you for your boots, IEDS, that could turn your best friend into mist. But this thing, it's different. It doesn't want to kill us. It wants to own us, piece by piece, payment by payment." We formed a support group of sorts, meeting in my apartment because it felt like taking back some control. We compared receipts, documented our dreams, tried to find patterns. Miranda discovered something interesting. The amounts weren't random, they were proportional. The more you had, emotionally, spiritually, not just financially, sensei, the more he took. She'd been an artist when she moved in, full of creativity and hope. Now she could barely hold a paintbrush without her hands shaking. Bill had mapped out the building's history, every tenant, every disappearance. The pattern was clear. People either left within 6 months, or they stayed forever. There was no in-between. "We need to break the lease," I said. Bill laughed, bitter, hollow. "You think I haven't tried? You think any of us haven't tried? The lease doesn't break, it just holds. Try to leave and see what happens." I did try. Packed my stuff, called a moving company, but when they arrived, they couldn't see my apartment. To them, 4B didn't exist. The hallway went from 4A to 4C. When I tried to show them, tried to drag them inside, they looked at me like I was insane. "Lady, there's nothing there. Just a wall." I was trapped. We were all trapped, and November was coming. Halloween night. I couldn't sleep. None of us could. We gathered in my apartment, Miranda, Bill, the young couple, Jack and Lisa, a few others who'd finally admitted what was happening to them. "We need to confront him together," Jack said. "In the dream. If we're all there at once." "He controls the dreams," Bill countered. "We'd be walking into his territory with no weapons." But Miranda had an idea. She'd been experimenting. Lucid dreaming techniques, meditation, ways to maintain consciousness even in the dream state. "What if we don't fight him? What if we just refuse, all of us, together? What's he going to do? Evict us from our dreams?" It sounded insane, but what about any of this was sane? We practiced that night, staying awake together, keeping each other grounded. When one of us started to drift, the others would pull them back. We made it until 2:45 a.m. Then the building shuddered. Not like an earthquake. Like something vast had turned its attention to us. The lights didn't flicker. They twisted. The walls didn't crack. They exhaled. And then we were all in the dream, together. But not in the office this time. We were in apartment 4B, but not my apartment. The original. From 1941. Everything in sepia tones like an old photograph. And there, sitting in a wingback chair by a fireplace that I didn't have, was Mr. Hendricks. Not the old man I'd met, not the thing in the dreams. The real Josiah Hendricks. dead for over 80 years, but still collecting rent. "You've been busy," he said. His voice was tired, almost sad, organizing, resisting. It's been a long time since tenants showed such initiative. "We're not paying anymore," I said. My voice shook, but I said it. He laughed, soft like dust falling. "You already have. Every night you sleep under my roof, you pay. Every dream you dream in my walls, you pay. The receipts are just a formality, a courtesy, really. Then we'll leave. Will you?" He gestured to the window. We looked. Outside wasn't Seattle, wasn't anywhere. Just an endless expanse of other buildings, other apartments, stretching to a horizon that hurt to perceive. "I own many properties, Sarah. In many cities, in many states of being. The physical building you inhabit is just one face of a much larger structure. You could leave tomorrow, move across the country, take a new name, and someday when you least expect it, you'll see a for rent sign. A perfect apartment, an impossible price, and you'll think, just this once, just until I get back on my feet." "You're a parasite," Bill spat. "I'm a landlord. I provide shelter, security, a place to rest your head, and I collect what's owed. That's the nature of the contract. Since the first human claimed a cave and charged others for its use." Miranda stepped forward. "What if we burn it down? The building, your precious property." His eyes flashed. For a moment, just a moment, I saw him as he really was. Not a man, not a ghost. Something older, hungrier, made of contracts and clauses, built from every signature ever signed in desperation. You could try. Others have. The building always rebuilds, the leases always renew, and the rent is always due. But then Lisa said something that changed everything. "You're lonely." The room went silent. Even the fire stopped crackling. "You're trapped too, aren't you? Collecting rent for eternity. Never able to leave. Never able to stop. When did you last have a tenant who stayed because they wanted to? Who wasn't here out of desperation or trickery?" Mr. Hendricks stood. For the first time in any dream. He looked uncertain. That's not relevant, isn't it?" Lisa continued. "You died here, in this apartment, alone. And you've been alone ever since, taking little pieces of people's lives because it's the only connection you have left. Enough." The dream shattered. We woke up gasping, scattered across my living room floor. But something had changed. There were no receipts. Our bank accounts were untouched. And on my coffee table was a note, handwritten in that spidery script, 1 month free. A gift. Don't waste it. November passed without incident. No dreams, no payments, but we knew it was temporary. A pause, not an ending. We used the time wisely. Research, preparation, and we found something. In the city archives, in the basement where they keep the records they don't want people to see. Josiah Hendricks didn't just die in apartment 4B. He was murdered. By his tenants. A group of families he'd evicted during the Depression. They'd come for him on November 30th, 1941, the last day of the month, when the rent was due. The police report was vague. Death by misadventure. But there was a witness statement from a child who'd lived in the building. She'd seen them corner him in 4B, heard him begging, offering to forgive their debts, offering anything. And then she'd heard him make a deal, not with his killers, with something else, something that had been listening, waiting, something that fed on desperation and debt. "Let me collect what I'm owed," he'd said. "Forever if need be. Until every debt is paid." His killers had laughed, thought him mad even as they The report doesn't say what they did, but they left him there, in 4B, and by morning, he was gone. But the building remained, and the leases never ended. December 1st is tomorrow. As I record this, as I tell you this story, I can feel him waiting. We all can. But we have a plan now, a real plan. You see, there's a clause in the original contract, the deal he made, hidden in the foundation of the building itself, written in languages that predate English. But Lisa, beautiful, brilliant Lisa, she found it. All debts are paid in full upon the true death of the creditor. He's not truly dead. Not yet, he's caught between. Collecting rent in dreams because he can't let go, can't move on. But maybe, just maybe, we can help him. Tomorrow night, when we dream, we're going to pay our rent one last time. But not with money, not with time. With something else. Something he's forgotten he needs. Forgiveness. It might not work, we might disappear like the others, but if we do, if this is the last recording I ever make, remember this. Check your lease agreements, read every word, every clause, because in this world, there are things that hunger for more than money, things that hide in the fine print, things that wait in the space between sleeping and waking. And if you ever see an apartment that's too good to be true, if the landlord seems a little too eager, if the building feels a little too old, run and don't look back, because once you sign, once you move in, once you call it home, the rent will always be due. Wait, do you hear that? It's 11:59 p.m. I can hear footsteps in the hallway, but not regular footsteps. They sound wet, like someone walking through thick mud, or blood. He's early. Oh God, he's never been early before. The receipts. They're appearing all around my room, floating down like snow, all of them. Every payment I've ever made, every second of life I've given him. And they're all marked past due. If you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, please, share this story, tell others, warn them, because I don't think our plan is going to work. I don't think he wants forgiveness. I think he wants us to become like him. Collectors, trapped between dreams and waking, taking from others what was taken from us. The doorknob is turning, but my door is locked. It's always been locked. Locks don't matter in dreams. And I'm so very tired. Recording ends. Hello, potential tenant. This is Mr. Hendricks from Hendricks Property Management. I've recently had a unit become available. Apartment 4B, newly renovated, perfect condition. The previous tenant left suddenly, but all their things are still here if you'd like them, including some interesting recording equipment. The rent is very reasonable, and our payment plans are flexible. If you're interested, you know where to find me. I'll be waiting, in your dreams. Sweet dreams, dear listeners, and remember, always read the fine print, because you never know what you're really signing away. If this story kept you up tonight, or if you have your own strange landlord story, leave a comment below. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more tales from the spaces between waking and sleeping. And that bell icon, ring it before something else does. Pleasant dreams. Story number 3. A cozy horror story for late-night listening. The moving truck's engine died exactly at midnight, right in front of the house that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. My GPS had been glitching for the last hour, showing roads that led nowhere and towns with names I couldn't pronounce. But this house was supposed to have burned down in 1692, along with everyone inside it. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and 3 days ago, I thought I was just inheriting my great-aunt's property in rural Massachusetts. What I found instead, well, let me just say that some family secrets should stay buried, especially when they're buried 15 miles from Salem, in a town that most maps forgot to include. The locals call this place Millbrook Hollow. The historical records? They pretend it never existed. But I'm sitting here now, in what used to be my great-aunt's study, writing this down because I need you to know what really happened here. The Salem witch trials? They were just the cleanup crew. The real trials happened right here. And I think they're about to start again. So, if you're listening to this late at night, maybe turn on a light. Trust me on that one. And whatever you do, don't look up your family tree while I'm telling you this story. Some branches are better left unclimbed. The story starts now. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Rain was drumming against my Boston apartment windows like impatient fingers, and I was 3 months behind on rent again. Freelance graphic design doesn't exactly scream financial stability, but it beats working in a cubicle, pretending to care about quarterly reports. The return address made me pause. Millbrook Hollow, Massachusetts. I'd never heard of the place, but the name on the envelope, Constance Mitchell, estate attorney. That was my great-aunt's name, the one my family never talked about. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper and an old brass key. Sarah, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The house is yours now. 47 Sycamore Lane, Millbrook Hollow. The GPS won't find it easily. Take Route 1, A north past Salem, then follow the old stone markers. You'll know them when you see them. There are things you need to understand about our family, about what we really are. The truth is in the basement, behind the third stone from the eastern wall. But don't go down there alone. Never alone. They're still watching. Aunt Constance, P.S. Bring sage. Lots of sage. I stared at that letter for 20 minutes. My great-aunt Constance had been the black sheep of the family, if you could even call us a family. My parents died when I was 12, car accident on I-95 during a winter storm. After that, it was just me and a series of foster homes until I aged out of the system. Nobody had ever mentioned that Constance owned property. Nobody had ever mentioned much of anything about her, actually. Just whispered conversations that stopped whenever I walked into the room, and my mother's nervous habit of changing the subject whenever her aunt's name came up. But here I was, 27 years old, broke, and apparently a property owner. The brass key felt warm in my palm, unnaturally warm. 3 days later, I was loading my entire life into a rented U-Haul truck. It took exactly 47 minutes, which says something depressing about the state of my existence. My laptop, some clothes, a futon that had seen better decades, and a box of art supplies that cost more than my security deposit. The drive should have taken 2 hours. It took 4. My phone lost signal somewhere around Danvers. The GPS started acting up near Peabody, showing roads that definitely weren't there and suggesting routes through what appeared to be solid forest. By the time I reached Salem, the sun was setting, and I was seriously considering the possibility that this was all an elaborate prank. That's when I saw the first stone marker. It was about 3 feet tall, weathered granite with symbols carved into its surface. Not letters, symbols. They looked almost Celtic, but wrong somehow. Like someone had taken ancient runes and twisted them into something else entirely. Something that made my eyes water if I stared too long. The marker was pointing northeast, into what looked like unused farmland. I followed the dirt road for another hour, my U-Haul bouncing through potholes that could swallow a small car. The trees grew thicker as I drove, their branches forming a canopy so dense that my headlights barely cut through the darkness. That's when I saw the second marker, then the third. Each one was different, but they all shared those same twisted symbols, and they all pointed in the same direction, deeper into the woods. The fourth marker was different, newer. It had a single word carved into its base, Millbrook. Below that, in smaller letters, population 0. That should have been my first warning. But I was tired, confused, and honestly a little desperate. So I kept driving. The road curved sharply to the left, and suddenly I was looking at a town that shouldn't exist. Millbrook Hollow was quaint, I guess, is the word people use when they can't think of anything nice to say. A single main street lined with colonial-era buildings, their windows dark and empty. A few street lamps cast pools of sickly yellow light, but they seemed to make the shadows deeper rather than brighter. And there wasn't a single person in sight. I drove slowly down Main Street, my engine echoing off the empty buildings, a general store with dusty windows, a small church with a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left, a diner called Martha's Kitchen with a closed sign that looked like it had been hanging there since the Clinton administration. At the end of Main Street, the road forked. To the left, a sign pointed toward Sycamore Lane. To the right, another sign simply read, Salem, 15 miles. I took the left fork. Sycamore Lane was exactly what you'd expect from a street with that name. Massive old trees lined both sides, their branches so thick they formed a tunnel overhead. The houses were spaced far apart, each one sitting on at least an acre of overgrown property. Number 47 was at the very end of the street. It was a Victorian-era farmhouse, 3 stories tall with a wraparound porch and enough gingerbread trim to stock a bakery. In daylight, it probably would have looked charming. At night, with my headlights casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn, it looked like something from a Tim Burton fever dream, and that's when my engine died. Not sputtered, not coughed, just stopped. The headlights flickered once and went out, leaving me sitting in complete darkness. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no wind, no distant highway noise. Just silence so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds trying to process what was happening. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth across the wooden boards. But there was nobody there. I was sure of it. My headlights had illuminated the entire front of the house before they died, and the porch had been empty. The footsteps stopped. A light appeared in one of the third-floor windows. Not electric light. Something warmer, flickering like candlelight. That's when I noticed the brass key in my hand was burning hot. I must have sat in that truck for 10 minutes just staring at that third-floor window. The candlelight never moved, never flickered in the way real flames do. It just waited. Finally, I forced myself to open the truck door. The hinges creaked like they were protesting, and the sound seemed to echo for miles in the dead air. The porch steps groaned under my weight as I climbed them. Each board seemed to announce my presence, and I found myself walking on my tiptoes, trying to minimize the noise. Which was ridiculous, really. If someone was in the house, they already knew I was here. The front door was painted deep red, with brass fixtures that matched the key in my hand. There was no doorbell, just an old-fashioned knocker shaped like, well, I couldn't quite tell what it was supposed to be. Some kind of animal, maybe. Or a person. The more I looked at it, the less sense it made. The key slid into the lock like it belonged there. The door swung open before I could even turn the handle. The smell hit me first. Not the musty, closed-up smell you'd expect from a house that had been empty for months. Instead, it smelled like herbs. Sage, definitely, but other things too. Rosemary, maybe. And something else. Something earthy and sharp that made my nose tingle. The entryway was larger than I'd expected, with a staircase that curved up to the second floor. Hardwood floors that looked like they'd been recently polished. And everywhere, candles. They were arranged on every available surface. The mantelpiece, the windowsills, even the floor along the baseboards. Dozens of them, all different sizes, all unlit. Except for one. A single white candle sat on a small table next to the staircase. It was burning steadily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The same light I'd seen from outside. I approached it slowly. There was a note beside it, written in spidery handwriting I didn't recognize. "Welcome home, Sarah. I've been waiting." The handwriting looked old, really old, like it had been written with a quill pen by someone who'd learned to write in the 18th century. But the ink was fresh. I looked around the entryway, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't an abandoned house. Someone had been maintaining it. Someone had lit that candle. Someone had written that note. But who? The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft patter of wax dripping onto the table. I was starting to think I should leave, come back in the morning with proper lighting and maybe a friend or two, when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Humming. Someone was humming upstairs. A tune I almost recognized. Something old. Something that tickled the edges of my memory like a half-forgotten lullaby. I grabbed the candle and started up the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The humming continued, soft and melodic, coming from somewhere on the second floor. The upstairs hallway was lined with doors, all of them closed except one at the very end. That's where the humming was coming from. I could see a faint glow spilling out into the hallway. I walked toward it, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Wait, bare feet? I looked down. I was still wearing my sneakers, but I couldn't hear my footsteps anymore. The room at the end of the hall was clearly a bedroom. An old, four-poster bed dominated the space, its curtains drawn back to reveal rumpled sheets and a dented pillow. A rocking chair sat by the window, moving slowly back and forth even though there was no breeze. And sitting in that chair, with her back to me, was a woman in a white nightgown. She was still humming. "Aunt Constance?" I whispered. The humming stopped. The rocking chair went still. Slowly, very slowly, the woman began to turn around. That's when I realized two things simultaneously. First, the woman in the chair had no face. Where her features should have been, there was just smooth skin, like an unfinished sculpture. Second, I was no longer holding a candle. My hands were empty, but the room was still filled with that same flickering light. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The faceless woman stood up. She was tall, taller than any person had a right to be, and her white nightgown seemed to move in a wind I couldn't feel. She raised one hand and pointed at me. When she opened her mouth to speak, her voice came from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere behind me. "You're early," the voice said. "We weren't expecting you for another 3 days." I spun around, but there was nobody there, just the empty doorway and the dark hallway beyond. When I turned back, the woman was gone. The rocking chair sat empty, still swaying slightly. On the seat of the chair was another note. "The basement. Before sunrise. Come alone." This handwriting was different. Fresher. And at the bottom of the note, in letters so small I had to squint to read them. "They know you're here now." I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. Down the stairs, through the entryway, out the front door and straight to my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine turned over immediately. The headlights blazed to life like nothing had ever been wrong. I backed out of the driveway so fast I nearly clipped the mailbox, then sat there for a moment, breathing hard and staring at the house. Every window was dark. No candles, no mysterious lights, no faceless women in rocking chairs. Just an empty old house that looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. But I knew what I'd seen, and more importantly, I knew I had to go back. Because the note was right about one thing. I was early. Aunt Constance's letter had been dated 3 days ago, but it had taken me 4 days to get here, which meant she'd known exactly when I would arrive. Down to the hour. I drove back to the main road and found a motel about 20 miles away. A depressing little place called the Sleepy Inn, with thin walls and a neon sign that flickered epileptically. but it had working lights and a deadbolt on the door, and right then, that was all I needed. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the lumpy bed with my laptop, researching everything I could find about Millbrook Hollow. What I found, well, it wasn't much. And what little there was didn't make sense. According to the few records I could dig up, Millbrook Hollow had been founded in 1689 by a group of families fleeing religious persecution in Salem. The town had prospered for exactly 3 years, reaching a peak population of 847 residents. Then, in 1692, everyone disappeared. Not died, not moved away, disappeared. The official records were vague, but I found references to unusual circumstances and matters best left unexamined. One document, a letter from a colonial-era official to his superior in Boston, mentioned signs of struggle and evidence of unnatural occurrence. But here's the thing that really bothered me. According to every record I could find, the town had been completely abandoned by the end of 1692. Nobody had lived there for over 300 years. So who had been maintaining that house? Who had lit those candles? And who was the faceless woman in the rocking chair? I finally fell asleep around dawn, my laptop still open on the bed beside me. I dreamed of empty towns and burning houses, of women in white nightgowns and notes written in impossible handwriting. When I woke up, there was a new message on my laptop screen. An email from an address I didn't recognize. Constance.mitchell.1692@millbrookhollow.net. The subject line read, "You can't run from what you are." The email was empty except for a single line of text. "The basement is waiting." I spent the entire day trying to convince myself not to go back. I drove to 3 different internet cafes, researching everything I could find about my family history. What I found was disturbing. The Mitchell family had a long association with Millbrook Hollow, dating back to the town's founding. We weren't just residents, we were founding members, and according to the few records that survived, we'd been the last family to leave. There was a genealogy website that traced our family line back to 1689. Eleanor Mitchell had been one of the original settlers, along with her husband Thomas and their 3 daughters. Eleanor was listed as the town's spiritual advisor, which seemed like a polite way of saying something else entirely. The record showed that Eleanor had died in 1692, along with her husband and 2 of their daughters. Only the youngest daughter, Mercy, had survived. She'd eventually married and taken her husband's name, but her children had carried on the Mitchell bloodline. My bloodline. But here's what really bothered me. According to the records, Eleanor Mitchell hadn't just died in 1692. She'd been executed, along with 16 other residents of Millbrook Hollow, for witchcraft. The Salem witch trials had ended in September of 1692. The Millbrook Hollow executions had taken place in October. I sat in that internet cafe until it closed, cross-referencing dates and names, trying to make sense of what I was reading. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. And the clearer it became, the more I understood why my family had never talked about Millbrook Hollow. We weren't just connected to the witch trials. We were the witch trials, the real ones. Salem had been the distraction, the public face of a much larger, much darker series of events. While everyone was watching the trials in Salem, something much worse was happening 15 miles away, and my family had been at the center of it. By the time I drove back to Millbrook Hollow, the sun was setting again. I'd bought supplies at a hardware store in Salem, flashlights, batteries, rope, and yes, sage. Lots of sage, just like Aunt Constance had suggested. The town looked different in the late afternoon light. Not better, exactly, but less hostile. The buildings still looked abandoned, but they seemed more like a movie set than an actual place where terrible things had happened. I parked in front of 47 Sycamore Lane and sat there for a few minutes, working up the courage to go inside. The house looked smaller somehow, less imposing than it had the night before. Just an old Victorian farmhouse that needed a fresh coat of paint and some yard work. This time, I brought a flashlight. The front door was unlocked, which shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow did. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The candles were still there, arranged on every surface just as they had been the night before. But they were all cold now, their wicks black and unused. The white candle on the table by the stairs wasn't there anymore. I made my way through the house systematically, checking each room. The parlor with its sheet-covered furniture. The kitchen with its ancient cast-iron stove and hand-pumped well. The dining room with its long table set for 13 people, though I was pretty sure it had been set for 8 the night before. Upstairs, the bedroom where I'd seen the faceless woman was empty. The rocking chair sat motionless by the window, and the bed looked like it hadn't been slept in for years. But on the nightstand was the brass key I'd left in my truck. I picked it up, surprised by how cold it felt. The metal was so cold it almost burned, like touching dry ice with bare fingers. That's when I noticed the second key lying beside it. This one was different, older, made of iron instead of brass, with symbols carved into its handle. The same twisted symbols I'd seen on the stone markers. There was another note underneath the keys. This one was written in my own handwriting. Go to the basement, now, before they realize you're here. I stared at that note for a long time. I was absolutely certain I hadn't written it. But it was definitely my handwriting, down to the way I crossed my T's and the little flourish I always added to my capital letters. I looked around the room, half expecting to see myself sitting in a corner somewhere, pen in hand. But there was nobody there. Just me and 2 keys and a note I definitely hadn't written, but definitely had. The basement door was in the kitchen, hidden behind a curtain I hadn't noticed the night before. The iron key fit perfectly in the old-fashioned lock. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, carved out of the same stone as the markers I'd seen along the road. My flashlight beam bounced off the rough-hewn walls, creating shadows that seemed to move independently of the light. At the bottom of the stairs was a room that should not have been able to exist. It was massive, much larger than the footprint of the house above. The walls were lined with stones, each one carved with those same twisted symbols, and in the center of the room was a circle of standing stones, like a miniature Stonehenge. But it was what was inside the circle that made me stop breathing. Skeletons. 17 of them, arranged in a perfect circle, their bones bleached white with age. Each skeleton was chained to the stone behind it, heavy iron shackles around their wrists and ankles. And in the very center of the circle was a single chair, made of the same stone as the walls, with symbols carved into its arms and back. Someone was sitting in that chair. It was a woman in a long dress, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked exactly like the photographs of my great-aunt Constance that I'd found online. Except she was completely motionless, and her skin had the waxy, translucent look of a corpse. Her eyes opened. "Hello, Sarah," she said in a voice like autumn leaves. "I've been waiting for you." I took a step backward, my flashlight shaking in my hands. You're dead. The obituary said you died 3 months ago." Aunt Constance smiled. It was not a comforting expression. "Death is relative in this family, dear. We've never been particularly good at staying buried." She gestured to the skeletons surrounding her. "These are our ancestors. The ones who were executed in 1692 for practicing what the good people of Salem called witchcraft. But they weren't witches, Sarah. They were something much older, much more necessary." The bones began to rattle softly, as if responding to her words. "You see, there are things in this world that most people prefer not to acknowledge. Things that slip through the cracks between reality and nightmare. things that feed on fear and desperation, and the kind of darkness that lives in the human heart. She stood up from the stone chair, and I realized she was translucent. I could see the wall behind her through her body. For centuries, our family has been the guardians, the ones who stand between the everyday world and the things that want to tear it apart. The Salem trials were a distraction, a way to draw attention away from what was really happening here. I found my voice. What was really happening here? A binding, she said simply. The most powerful binding ritual ever attempted. 17 of our family members gave their lives to create a prison for something that should never have existed in the first place. She walked toward me, her feet making no sound on the stone floor. But bindings fade, Sarah. Even the most powerful ones. And this one has been weakening for years. That's why I called you here. Called me? The inheritance was a lie, dear. I've been dead for 3 months, just as you said. But I've been waiting for you, because you're the key. She pointed to the brass key in my hand. That's not just a door key. It's a bloodline key. It only works for direct descendants of Eleanor Mitchell. And you're the last one. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You want me to take your place. I want you to save the world, she corrected. The thing we bound in 1692 is almost free. I can feel it pressing against the barriers, testing them for weaknesses. It's been sending scouts, trying to find a way through. I thought about the faceless woman in the rocking chair. Scouts? Echoes. Fragments of itself, slipping through the cracks. They can't do much harm on their own, but they're reporting back. Learning. Soon, it will have enough information to break free entirely. She was standing right in front of me now, close enough that I should have been able to feel her breath. But there was nothing. Just a cold that seemed to seep into my bones. What happens if it gets free? Her smile was sad and terrible. Have you ever wondered why there are so many stories about the end of the world, Sarah? So many different cultures with so many different versions of the same basic idea? It's because this thing has gotten loose before. Not here, not in our reality, but in others, parallel to ours. She gestured to the symbols carved into the walls. These aren't just decorations. They're windows. And if you know how to look through them, you can see what happened to the worlds where our family failed. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. As I stared at the nearest symbol, it began to glow with a soft blue light. And in that light, I saw cities burning, people running through streets that ran with blood, and above it all, something vast and dark and hungry, feeding on the terror and despair. That's our future, Aunt Constance said quietly, if you walk away. But if I stay, if I perform this binding, I die? Yes. And I become like you? Trapped here forever? Yes. I looked around the basement, at the skeletons chained to the walls, at my great-aunt's ghost, at the symbols that showed glimpses of apocalyptic futures. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't just, I don't know, some kind of elaborate hallucination? She laughed, and the sound was like wind through dead leaves. Look at your hands, Sarah. I looked down. My hands were glowing with the same blue light as the symbols on the walls, and as I watched, symbols began to appear on my palms, the same twisted runes I'd been seeing since I arrived in Millbrook Hollow. The blood remembers, Aunt Constance said, even when the mind forgets. You've always been different, haven't you? Dreams that came true. Knowing things you shouldn't know, animals that act strangely around you. She was right. I had always been different. My foster families had thought I was just imaginative, but I'd always known it was more than that. The dreams that turned out to be previews of the next day's events. The way dogs would whimper and hide when I walked by. The time I'd predicted my high school principal's heart attack 3 days before it happened. I'd spent years convincing myself it was all coincidence. But standing in that basement, with glowing symbols appearing on my skin, I couldn't pretend anymore. "So, what do I do?" I asked. Aunt Constance pointed to the stone chair in the center of the circle. "Sit down. Place your hands on the armrests. Speak the words I'm about to teach you. And when you're finished, you'll join us forever." The chair looked cold and final. "Is there any other way?" "No." I walked toward the chair, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. The skeletons seemed to watch me, their empty sockets following my movement. But as I reached the edge of the stone circle, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps, coming down the stairs. Heavy footsteps, like someone wearing boots. Aunt Constance's expression changed instantly. The sadness was replaced by something much more urgent. "Run," she whispered. "They found you. Run now." Who found me? But she was already fading, becoming more translucent by the second. "The other families," she said, her voice growing fainter. "The ones who want the binding to fail. They've been hunting us for centuries. They think chaos is preferable to order." The footsteps were getting closer. "Sarah, listen to me. There's another way, but you have to reach the circle before they do. Sit in the chair and speak these words." She whispered something in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood every syllable. The words burned themselves into my memory like brands. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. "Go!" Aunt Constance hissed, and then she was gone. I ran toward the stone chair, my flashlight beam swaying wildly as I moved. Behind me, I could hear voices. Multiple voices, speaking in the same strange language my aunt had used. I reached the chair and threw myself into it, my hands slamming down on the carved armrests. The stone was so cold it burned, but I held on. The voices behind me rose to a shout. I could see lights now, multiple flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, getting closer. I opened my mouth and spoke the words Aunt Constance had taught me. The world exploded in blue light. When the light faded, I was alone in the basement. The stone chair was warm beneath me, and the symbols on the walls were pulsing with a steady heartbeat rhythm. The skeletons were still chained to their positions, but now I could see them clearly. They weren't just bones anymore. They were my family. I could see Eleanor Mitchell, my many times great-grandmother, her long dress still clinging to her skeletal frame. Her husband Thomas, his colonial-era coat somehow preserved after 3 centuries. Their daughters, their cousins, their friends, all of them staring at me with empty sockets that somehow managed to convey both gratitude and sorrow. "Welcome home," Eleanor said in a voice like wind through autumn leaves. "We've been waiting so long." I tried to stand up, but I couldn't move. Looking down, I saw that iron shackles had appeared around my wrists, binding me to the chair. But strangely, I wasn't afraid. The metal felt right, like it belonged there. "The binding is complete," Thomas said. "You've taken your place in the circle. The prison is sealed once again." "For how long?" I asked. "Until the next generation comes of age," Eleanor replied. "Your children, or your children's children. The blood always calls to blood. But I don't have children." Eleanor smiled, an expression that was both beautiful and terrible on her skeletal face. "You will. The bloodline ensures it. Somewhere out there is someone who will love you, marry you, give you a daughter. And when the time comes, that daughter will take your place." The thought should have horrified me. Instead, I felt peaceful, like I'd finally found where I belonged. "What about the people upstairs, the ones who were chasing me?" "The Corwin family," Thomas said with obvious distaste. "They've been our enemies since the beginning. They believe the thing we've imprisoned should be set free. They think chaos and destruction are natural, necessary parts of the world's order." "They're wrong," Eleanor added. "Some things should stay buried. Some hungers should never be fed." I could feel something stirring below us, something vast and ancient and endlessly hungry. It pressed against the barriers we'd created, testing them, looking for weaknesses, but the prison held. For now. How do I live like this?" I asked. "Chained to a chair in a basement for the next 30 years? Eleanor laughed, and the sound was like music. "Oh, dear child, you think this is all there is? You think we've been sitting here motionless for 3 centuries? The basement began to change around me. The stone walls faded, replaced by a comfortable living room with overstuffed chairs and a fireplace that crackled with warmth. The shackles on my wrists became delicate silver bracelets. The stone chair transformed into a recliner that could have come from any middle-class living room in America. "The binding isn't a prison," Thomas explained, settling into a chair that hadn't been there moments before. "It's a responsibility. We maintain the barriers, yes, but we also live. We exist between worlds, watching over both." Through the windows of this impossible room, I could see everything. Streets in Boston where I'd walked as a child. Coffee shops in cities I'd never visited. Libraries and art galleries and park benches where people sat reading books or feeding pigeons or having quiet conversations with friends. "This is what we protect," Eleanor said, joining me at the window. "All of it, every ordinary moment, every small happiness, every boring Tuesday afternoon when nothing special happens but the world keeps spinning." I understood now. The thing we'd imprisoned fed on chaos, on fear, on the breakdown of ordinary life. It wanted to turn the world into something twisted and broken. Our job was to make sure that never happened. But what about my life? My apartment, my work, my friends? "You never really had friends," Eleanor said gently. "You never let anyone get close enough. And your work? Well, you can do graphic design from anywhere, can't you? Even from between worlds." She was right, of course. I'd spent 27 years feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, like I was always on the outside looking in. Now I knew why. "The loneliness ends here," Thomas added. "You're family now. Really family, and we take care of our own." Over the next few hours, days, time moved strangely in that place. They taught me about my new existence, how to monitor the prison's boundaries, how to send pieces of my consciousness out into the world, maintaining the house and the town as a cover story, how to influence events from a distance, preventing the Corwin family and others like them from getting too close to the truth. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life with purpose, with meaning, with people who understood what I was going through because they'd been through it themselves. And sometimes, late at night when the barriers were strongest and the thing below was quiet, I could walk through the town of Millbrook Hollow as it had been in 1692. The streets filled with people I'd never met but somehow knew. Children playing games that had been forgotten for centuries. Women hanging laundry that would never dry. Men discussing crops that would never grow. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and absolutely real. But the most important thing I learned was this. The binding wasn't just about keeping something locked away. It was about maintaining balance. The thing we'd imprisoned wasn't evil in the way most people understand evil. It was hungry, ancient. It had existed since before the world settled into the patterns we call natural law. It wanted to return things to the way they'd been before. Before physics. Before logic. Before the comfortable certainty that the sun would rise tomorrow, and gravity would keep working, and 2 + 2 would always equal 4. Some might call that freedom. I called it nightmare. So I sat in my chair, my comfortable, impossible chair, and I watched. I maintained the barriers. I kept the prison strong. And slowly, very slowly, I began to understand something my family had never told me. The loneliness I'd felt my entire life? It wasn't because I was different. It was because I was incomplete. I was half of something, waiting for the other half to find me. And 3 months after I took my place in the circle, she did. Her name was Maya, and she walked into the town of Millbrook Hollow on a Tuesday afternoon, looking for directions to Salem. She was a folklore researcher working on her dissertation about witch trial mythology. She'd heard rumors about a town that had been forgotten by history, a place where the real trials had happened. She found me sitting on the porch of 47 Sycamore Lane, which appeared to be a charming bed and breakfast to anyone who wasn't part of the bloodline. I was reading a book, something I could actually do now, pulling texts from libraries all over the world with just a thought. "Excuse me," she said, climbing the front steps. "I'm looking for information about the 1692 witch trials. Someone told me they might have happened here?" I looked up at her, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. A sense of completion, of recognition, like finding a missing piece of yourself you never knew was lost. "That's a complicated question," I said, closing my book. "Would you like some tea?" We talked for hours, about history and folklore and the stories people tell themselves to make sense of the world. She was brilliant, funny, and completely unafraid of things that should have terrified her. When I finally told her the truth, all of it, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "So you're immortal," she said finally. "Essentially, yes. And you're bound to protect the world from something that wants to destroy it." "That's right. And you can't leave this place. Not physically, no." She nodded thoughtfully. "Can I see the basement?" I should have said no. I should have sent her away, made her forget what I'd told her, protected her from the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I took her hand and led her down those stone steps. The basement appeared to her exactly as it was. No comfortable living room illusion, just stone walls and chained skeletons and a chair that radiated power and purpose. She walked around the circle slowly, examining the symbols, the bones, the ancient ironwork. When she reached the chair, she placed her hand on its arm. "It's warm," she said, surprised. "It responds to the bloodline," I explained. "Only family members can—" "Maya, what are you doing?" She was sitting down in the chair, and the moment she did, iron shackles began to form around her wrists. "Maya, no. Get up, get out of there." But she just smiled at me. "I've been having dreams about this place for months," she said calmly. "Dreams about you, about all of this. I thought they were just, academic inspiration. But they weren't, were they? The shackles locked into place with a sound like thunder. And suddenly I could see her clearly, really see her. She was glowing with the same blue light that had appeared on my hands. And on her palms, symbols were forming. Different symbols. Not the twisted runes of my family, but something else, something complementary. "The Corwin family," I breathed. "You're one of them." "Was," she corrected. "My great-great-grandmother was Sarah Corwin. She left the family when she realized what they really wanted, what they were willing to do to get it." Eleanor's voice whispered in my mind. The bloodlines were meant to work together, originally. Before the schism, before the war between order and chaos. "2 chairs," Maya said, looking around the basement. "There were always supposed to be 2 chairs, weren't there? 2 guardians. One to maintain the prison, one to monitor the prisoner." She was right. As I watched, a second stone chair rose from the floor, directly across from mine. The symbols on the walls rearranged themselves, forming a perfect balance between order and chaos, structure and freedom, imprisonment and release. The thing below us stirred, but it wasn't pressing against the barriers anymore. It was settling, like a wild animal that had finally been given enough space to be comfortable in its cage. "Balance," I said, understanding flooding through me. It was never about locking it away forever. It was about finding the right balance. Maya nodded. My family thought freedom meant letting it loose. Your family thought safety meant keeping it locked up. But the truth is somewhere in between. We sat in our chairs, facing each other across the circle of bones, and for the first time since I'd arrived in Millbrook Hollow, everything felt right. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we live," Maya said. "We guard. We balance. And maybe, someday, we figure out how to heal the thing below instead of just containing it." She reached across the space between us and took my hand. The iron shackles clinked softly, but they didn't feel like chains anymore. They felt like anchor points, like roots that would keep us steady while we did the most important work in the world. "Together," she added. "Together," I agreed. And in the depths below us, something ancient and hungry and eternally patient settled into sleep, dreaming dreams of a world where chaos and order danced together instead of fighting. The real witch trials had ended at last. Epilogue. 3 months later. I'm writing this in what appears to be the study of a Victorian farmhouse, though anyone who visits sees exactly what they expect to see. A cozy bed and breakfast, a private residence, a historical landmark. Reality is flexible when you exist between worlds. Maya and I have settled into our new existence quite well. We maintain the balance, monitor the boundaries, and keep the world safe from things it doesn't need to know about. The Corwin family hasn't bothered us since that night in the basement. I think they finally understand that some battles are better ended with compromise than victory. We've even started a blog about local folklore and historical preservation. It gets a surprising amount of traffic from researchers and paranormal enthusiasts. Maya handles most of the writing. She has a gift for making the extraordinary sound perfectly ordinary. Sometimes, late at night, we walk through the restored town of Millbrook Hollow, watching the shadows of people who lived and died 3 centuries ago. They seem happy, finally, complete, the way I feel now. But here's the thing I want you to remember if you've been listening to this story. The thing that keeps me awake sometimes, even though I don't technically need sleep anymore. There are other towns, other families, other prisons that need guards, and some of them are failing. So if you ever find yourself driving down a road that doesn't appear on any map, following stone markers with symbols that hurt to look at, if you ever inherit property from a relative you never knew existed, if you ever feel that particular kind of loneliness that comes from being exactly what the world needs, but didn't know it was missing, pay attention, because the bloodlines are vast and complicated, and you might be more connected to this story than you think. After all, someone had to survive to tell it. Someone had to be out there, carrying the genes, living the ordinary life, completely unaware that they're the key to keeping something terrible locked away. Someone like you. Sweet dreams. Did this story leave you wondering about your own family history? Have you ever experienced dreams that felt too real to be dreams? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And maybe check those old family documents one more time. You never know what you might find. Don't forget to subscribe for more cozy horror stories that will help you drift off to sleep, if you can manage it after this one. And remember, some inheritance letters are worth more than money. Sometimes they're worth the world. Now, listen the whispers and make a decision whether we are going to cooperate with the whispers or we just want to skip them. But actually, no one can skip these whispers. If you walk away from them, they will run towards you until they reach you. They confront you, make you pay, make you suffer the same thing they suffer. There is no escape from them. If you want to escape, help them, so they can have peace, and you also can have it. Help, or you will ask for help soon. So, the end of today's video has arrived. Share your personal horror experiences in the comments. Also, comment the part of the story that you find the most horror and terrifying. If you like this video, leave a like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Also, ring the bell icon so you don't miss the upcoming videos. Remember, don't run from whispers, because they follow you. They know you. They want you to listen, just confront them. Now, sleep well, or should I say, have a haunted night.